Hi, boys and girls. It's Mrs. Harris again. Let's read this text, Theodore Roosevelt, the adventurous president, again. Today we're going to do a close read of chapters 3 and 4. Don't forget, you need this text in front of you so you can read along with me. And you need a buddy so you can turn and talk when I ask you questions. Let's think about what we read yesterday. What did we learn from chapters 1 and 2 about Teddy Roosevelt? Turn and tell your partner. Great job! Did you remember that Teddy liked to set goals? That he was a sickly kid? And that he loved animals? Those were 3 important details we read yesterday about Teddy Roosevelt. Let's learn some more today. Turn to this page, Chapter 3, Teddy Enters Politics. I want you to think about while we're reading, what happened in Teddy's life when he went to college. Listen for those details. Teddy entered Harvard University in 1876. He was a bundle of energy. He worked and played hard. He talked all the time, and he loved books. He could read very fast, and he had an amazing memory. Years later, he could repeat things that he'd read word for word. Teddy planned to be a scientist, but 2 things happened that would change his life forever. Well, I know when an author says that, I need to pay attention because they're getting ready to tell me 2 things that happened when Teddy was in college that would change his life forever. Let's find out. During Teddy's 2nd year at school, his father died suddenly. It was a shock. Teddy's friends and family worried about him. They were afraid he would never get over his sadness. But Teddy was a man of action. He worked harder than ever to help take his mind off his troubles. Early in his 3rd year at Harvard, joy came back into his life. He fell in love with a young woman named Alice Lee. Teddy and Alice planned to get married. Okay, so let's think back to that question I asked. What happened in Teddy's life when he went to college? Can you find the 2 things? Point to them. Did you point to these details? His father died suddenly. That was a sad thing that happened when Teddy was in college. But then he fell in love with a young woman named Alice. That was a happy thing that happened in college. Let's keep reading. Alice made it clear that she did not want Teddy to become a scientist. She didn't like the idea of cutting up animals or the smell of the chemicals he used. Teddy wanted to please Alice. He also wanted to honor his father. He could do that by working to make the world a better place. And if he were famous, that would bring honor to the family name. He knew what he should do with his life. Instead of science, he would go into politics. Let's take a look at this heading. Teddy, the lawmaker. Be thinking while we read, what are some ways Teddy was different than the other politicians? Listen to find out what made Teddy different. By November 1881, Teddy was a married man. He was also an elected official. Teddy ran as a Republican candidate for the New York State Assembly, the law-making body of the state. Teddy was different from most of the others in the assembly. He stood out for several reasons. There was the way he looked. Teddy had his hair parted down the middle. He wore an eyeglass that clipped to his nose and hung from a chain. He liked fancy clothes. Teddy's background was different too. His family was wealthy. That means they were rich and had a lot of money. He had traveled around the U.S. and even to Egypt. He had a university education. Most people in politics at that time did not come from rich families. They did not have college degrees. So Teddy seemed out of place in the state government. So what were some ways that Teddy was different from the other politicians? Can you point to the details and show your partner? Did you talk about how he looked different with his parted hair and the eyeglass that hung from a chain? And he had fancy clothes. His family had a lot of money. And he went to college when other politicians didn't. That made him different. Do you think that stopped Teddy? No, probably not. Let's keep reading. I'm right here. The other lawmakers soon found that Teddy was a hard worker. He worked to pass laws about who should get government jobs. Usually, politicians would give jobs to people who helped them get elected. Teddy believed people should work in government only if they were good at their jobs. The public liked Teddy. When he ran for office again in 1883, he got most of the votes. Everything was going very well for the young lawmaker. Then, in early 1884, tragedy struck. Here we go again, the author getting ready to tell us something bad happened. Tragedy struck. What happened to poor Teddy now? Let's find out. Teddy and Alice had been expecting a baby. On February 12th, Alice Roosevelt had a little girl. The baby was named Alice, after her mother. Teddy and his wife were thrilled. The baby was healthy, but Teddy's wife became ill. At the same time, Teddy's mother, Mittie, was also very sick. On February 14th, Mittie died. A few hours later, in the same house, Teddy's wife died too. On the same terrible day, Teddy lost his mother and his wife. Oh man, there's that terrible tragedy. He lost his mother and his wife on the same day in the same house? That's terrible. Do you think that stopped Teddy and he gave up? What makes you think Teddy would not give up even after this terrible tragedy? Tell your partner. Yeah, you remember yesterday's story about how Teddy and his friends were coming to that river and they didn't stop. They just undressed and crossed it themselves anyway. Teddy always finds a way. Let's see how he finds a way and doesn't give up, even after this tragedy. Whoops, don't turn the page yet. We're right here. Teddy felt his world had ended. He did not know what to do. He turned to his sister Anna and asked her to take care of the new baby. Anna thought Teddy should build a home for his daughter. Teddy owned a piece of land in New York on Long Island. He decided to build a large house there. He called his new home Sagamore Hill. Sagamore was the name of a Native American chief. The chief had used the hill as a meeting place in the 1600s. Teddy finished his term in the New York State Assembly. Then he had to get away. He headed west, leaving Alice at home with Anna. Teddy had always loved the outdoors. Being active and busy in the outdoors would help the young widower forget his deep sadness. Chapter 4, Cowboy on the Range. What? A lawmaker turned into a cowboy? That's weird. What made Teddy an odd cowboy? Let's read to find out. Teddy moved to what is now North Dakota. The local people thought he was a pretty odd character. He talked like an Easterner. He seemed too small for the rugged Western life, and sometimes he wore glasses. That was very unusual for a cowboy. Everyone thought Teddy would find life too hard out west. Did you hear those details that made Teddy a weird cowboy? Tell your partner. Did you say that he talked different and that he was too small to be a cowboy? And he even wore glasses? Have you ever seen a cowboy with glasses? That's pretty strange. Let's keep reading. Everyone thought Teddy would find life too hard out west, but people would soon change their minds. Teddy rode out on the trail with a guide to hunt buffalo. The weather was cold and rainy. They couldn't find any buffalo. But Teddy never complained. In fact, he was having a wonderful time. It took 2 weeks for Teddy to find a buffalo. After he shot it, he did a little dance around it. He sent the animal's head back east. He wanted to have it stuffed to hang on his wall. A conservationist is born. Check out that heading. A conservationist is born. Did you know the word conserve means to save? I wonder what Teddy's going to work to save. Let's read and find out. Teddy loved being in the wild country. No matter how tired, wet, or hungry he got, he stayed in a good mood. Teddy loved nature. He thought it was beautiful and amazing. He studied every new plant or animal to see what he could learn. Teddy said, "A hunter should be a lover of nature, as well as of sport, or he will miss half the pleasure of being in the woods." He realized that nature must be protected, or it will disappear. People will tear it down or spoil it. People who try to protect nature are conservationists. One day, Teddy would become the greatest conservationist president in history. Teddy would become the greatest conservationist president in history. What's a conservationalist? Remember, conserve means to save. Can you find it in the text? What is a conservationalist? Oh, it's right here. People who try to protect nature are conservationists. Whoops, don't turn the page. Teddy lived in the West for 2 years. Then he headed back east. He was a changed man. He was tough and healthy. He would go back to politics, but his life in the West would always be a part of him. Teddy went home to Sagamore Hill. Now he would get to know his little daughter, Alice. He would also get to know an old friend again. Her name was Edith Carew. Edith and Teddy had known each other as children. They met again after the death of Teddy's wife. Teddy and Edith got married at the end of 1886. The couple lived at Sagamore Hill with Teddy's daughter, Alice. Over the years, Edith and Teddy had 5 more children: Theodore, Kermit, Ethel, Archibald, and Quentin. Teddy spent much of his time writing. He had written part of his book while he was still in college. Throughout his life, he continued to write about history, nature, politics, and his own life. He wrote more than 45 books. He could have been a writer and nothing else, but that was not enough for Teddy. He had too much energy for just one career. He needed much more to do to keep him busy and happy. A new job. Teddy became a police commissioner in New York City. At that time, some of the police in New York were not honest. Some slept on the job instead of keeping the streets safe. Some would take money from criminals. In return, the police promised not to arrest the lawbreakers. Teddy walked through the streets late at night. He caught many police officers breaking the law. He made sure that anyone not doing his job would get in trouble. All his life, Teddy had believed that the problems of the poor were their own fault. But spending time in poor areas of New York City helped change his mind. Now he felt that the poor could not improve their lives if they were not paid fairly for their work. It made Teddy angry to see bosses get rich off the labor of the poor. It was a lesson he would always remember and try to do something about later in his life. Teddy had some interesting jobs after college. What kinds of jobs did we learn he held? You're right. He was a lawmaker, a conservationist, a writer, and a police commissioner.